Hey there, guys. Welcome to Fifth Friday.
Hello.
We kind of wanted to start in a way that is very vulnerable and uncomfortable for us.
So not sarcastic?
Yeah, we're not starting right out with sarcasm, which is, do you feel a little weird?
I do. Let's just thank people and go.
Yeah, seriously. We wanted to thank our current 43 subscribers on YouTube. If you enjoy this show or if you just like hitting buttons, please continue to subscribe. It's really helpful. Also, if you enjoy what we're doing and are interested in more stuff like what we do with Fifth Fridays, like thoughts on writing and stuff, we have a Substack, links in the doobly-doo. And frankly, for the price of a cup of coffee, you can keep us yapping.
Yeah, we really appreciate that.
So you wanted to talk about a small little piece of business, right?
Yeah. The two of us kind of wake up in the morning. We ask ourselves little questions. What are we going to have for dinner? Do I really have to do the laundry? What are artists? And what is art?
Yeah, because you were particularly interested because you've been reading different stuff on this. Like, what makes an artist?
Not just what makes an artist, but what makes a writer in particular, because...
Yeah, that's a good specificity.
Yeah, because I would go to writing conferences, and there'd be these people who like, oh, I'm not a real writer. And I'm like, oh, well, what do you write? Oh, I've written a bunch of fan fiction that I self-published. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, how is it finished? Oh, yeah, I have pre-finished works. They're about, 100,000 words altogether. And I'm like, how many people read this? And she's like, oh, just about 1,500 people. And I'm like, man, you are more of an author than I am.
Yeah, more than an author than a lot of us.
Yeah. But then I would also meet these people who are like, oh, yes, I'm an author. I have this really literary story I'm going to tell that conquers the themes of mankind and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh, cool. How much have you written? Oh, I haven't actually started writing it yet. So that's like, not, so I'm like, between those two, the fan fiction person is frankly more of an artist in my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If we're just talking about those kind of options, without a doubt, it's the fan fiction person.
Oh, yeah.
But without making too much fun of Senior Pretentious, he does touch on something. Notice I made it a he because I've got this guy in a trench coat wearing a beret.
The guy who I was thinking is also a dude, so I think that's very funny.
Don't get us wrong. Everybody does this.
Oh, yeah.
Even pro writers do this.
I know so many writers who are like, oh, I haven't actually started writing or I haven't finished a thing, but, when I do, it's going to be great. I'm like, great. The people who are sitting down and putting out mediocre stuff are frankly more artistic. Like nothing's wrong with if all you can do is come up with a story in your brain and watch it yourself. That's wonderful, but that's not the same as creating something shareable and building a community around it.
But, and this is what I want to go.
My negative Nancy's coming out.
Yeah, no, which is good. But I like talking about what makes someone a thing rather than what doesn't. And the thing that all those people have in common, which is still necessary, was the first thing you had sort of talked about as necessary, which is dreaming.
Yes.
So go ahead and talk about that, like the art as dreamer.
Yes. The first stage Lane and I kind of came up with on this is there is something about artistic people that dream. We tell ourselves stories in our mind. We imagine fantasy landscapes to build. We think about things in this creative way. We consume books differently. We watch movies differently because we are not just absorbing the story. We're thinking about it. We're letting it influence us. We're feeling it, for lack of a better word. And there's something to the artist as a dreamer. And that's the pretentious guy. I'm writing this in my head. It's always going to be perfect there. As a craft mentor, I'm like, okay, but you got to get it out of your head. But that's a very important stage, the stage where you're thinking about ideas, where you're consuming as many as you can.
And I want to go into that because it is also where I think a mistake people make on the dreaming. There's two. One is the one we're going to get into, which is the never actually getting it down. But the other is not understanding that dreaming is in itself a muscle that has skills attached to it.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is this. So I could read, and did for a long time, nothing but a particular genre, right? So for me, let me say comic books. I love comic books. comic books come in all different forms. See, there's more Marvel, there's more heroic, there's more undercurrent, there's Alan Moore.
The pulps,
Yeah, no, because I'm talking about comic books.
Oh, but I meant like the Dynamites.
Yes, the thing is, if I stay within that genre too much, I sort of become embedded with a particular structure and a particular aesthetic. Nothing inherently wrong with that. But the creators of everything I just mentioned are reading a much broader swath.
Yes.
And so the first muscle as a dreamer, I think you need to really work, is this open-ended reading as much or watching as much as you can and making sure they're different from each other.
Yeah. The other day we were talking about the value of mediocre stuff, of stuff that isn't that perfect, isn't the classics, and why you allow that into your brain. If you're not enjoying it, if you enjoy something that's basically like brain rot and you think it's brain rot, but you enjoy it, it's like, that'll inform you in interesting ways. The people who take soap opera concepts and turn it into high drama.
Well, absolutely. And the thing that's fun with me is so this is where I end up being your irritable English teacher from high school. I actually think, especially if you want to be an artist, and if the book is not too long, you should finish it.
Yeah.
It's worth finishing the movie. It's worth finishing the episode. Now, if you're not digging War and Peace, which I've started for the first time relatively recently and I'm loving, but if you're not digging War and Peace, I get it. That is a massive time. But if you're not digging, let's say, The Old Man and the Sea,
it's a much thinner book.
It's a much thinner book.
Yeah.
And even if you dislike it, if you're reading and dreaming actively, if you're not just going, okay, how does this make me feel? But why does it make me feel? What are they doing? Yeah. That kind of breakdown is useful for great works. It's useful for good works. It's useful for mediocre works. And I'll tell you, I've learned some of my favorite lessons from truly terrible books.
There's something in this that is not sitting right with me as an audience. What do I need to explore here? What are they doing that I don't want to do? Or what does this say about me as an artist that what is the thing I dislike in this? Oh, this also goes back to your Everything is Genius, your current Substack column.
Oh, right.
Just in terms of you have to trust that the artist who has shared this thing is coming from a place of intention, and there could be something you find there if you wake up your mind to look for it.
That's interesting. No. That is not my feeling at all.
Sorry.
Because I, as a reader, don't actually think I need that.
Oh, okay.
Because I, as a reader, especially if I want to be an artist, maybe it's different if I want to be a critic, but I do what I like calling pulling a Lisa. So when Lisa criticizes something, she does not, and I have a tendency to do this version of criticism. So I'll look at something like, okay, they were trying to accomplish this, they didn't quite do this, they should have done this, maybe do this, etc.
I do the thing where I rewrite Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah, Lisa just rewrites it, and that's kind of what I mean by dreaming. And that's kind of what I mean by bad stuff, mediocre stuff that doesn't resonate with you is not a bad thing. Because you've absorbed some stuff. You're like, well, that's, to quote Lisa, that's stupid. Why would they do that? They should have done this. And then they should have done this. So this is where there might, and I don't want to get too finger wagging. I will say that reading broadly, I have never seen hurt. I've only seen it help.
Yep.
I don't want you to take that to mean, oh my gosh, I have not gone through the entirety of Monroe's canon, Saki, for those of you. I therefore cannot be a writer.
Or one of the things like, oh no, I've been only taught in the Western canon. I have to read everything in Japan and everything in Germany before I can really begin writing. And the other thing I want to counsel people to keep their eyes open to is something we were talking about also earlier today. Looking at popular things that you don't like, that don't match your taste. I can tell you, I was not particular, even as a romance reader, I was not particularly a fan of Twilight or of the 50 Shades of Grey books. But I know that there's something in those that resonated with people. So I read those so that I know I can ask what in this resonated with people. What was this hitting? What did this bring to people that I can also bring. What did other people see in this? And if you can get past your initial, I don't want to say pretension or elitism, but sometimes it is that. If you can get past your initial, like, oh, I don't like this person's craft, their style is a bit lacking for my taste. You can find, like, what's the core thing what is the thing that made this blow up? Why is this so popular?
Yeah, I'll add to that. I feel the same way about Dan Brown. Dan Brown is not my favorite writer.
Da Vinci Code, right?
Yeah, Da Vinci Code, Angels and Demons.
Oh, right, yeah.
At least 4 others I've read, despite my claim. And the thing with Dan Brown is, like, Dan Brown you should read just to know how to end a chapter in a thriller.
Yeah, just for pacing. Because I remember when I was reading the Da Vinci Code, I was also not enjoying it, but I couldn't put it down. Because I'm like, I am not having a good time, but I'm already halfway through this book.
Yeah, because I want to know, okay.
I want to know what happens next.
You want to know what happens next?
Yeah.
And no shade to Dan Brown, who is a much more successful artist than either of us.
Absolutely. It wasn't my taste.
And this is it. This is a taste thing. Now, sometimes you may notice that seems like a cop-out, and that's because it absolutely is. I fall under the school of I'm polite. Some of the people we mention we genuinely hate with a fiery passion. And if you get a Diet Coke in me, I'll describe how they're destroying Western literature. No one we mentioned, maybe. But the flip side of it is that's not particularly useful always as an artist. Because it's helpful to know what you don't like.
Yeah, it's really useful to know your own taste. I know a mystery has to achieve a really high quality for me to enjoy reading it. So does a thriller. So does horror. Although I can usually do movies that are horror, thriller, and mystery much easier than books.
So,
which is different than a romance or a fantasy, which, because I love those genres, my bar is much lower for those. So I will accept a lot more craft issues in those kind of books.
Yeah, so this is entirely a taste thing.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if I have a favorite thing of which I'm more forgiving. Because where I fall into this, right, is, and I think this is the same, I think this is related but slightly different. There's the I'm more forgiving because it's my taste. And I'm more forgiving of particular artistic ways of looking at it because it's not the genre. So, we just watched GoldenEye. I'm sorry, we just watched Goldfinger. We just watched Goldfinger, the Sean Connery one. And say whatever you want about the 60s time period, et cetera, et cetera. That's not actually what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is if you were to watch that and go, he couldn't take that punch. That wouldn't have taken him out. That wouldn't have killed him. You would go, come on, it's a James Bond. So you might say, oh, because it's not realistic. But notice that's not quite right because they play with verisimilitude. So in the moment where, spoiler alert for a 60-year-old movie, the moment when Goldfinger is talking to Bond and revealing his plan is not to steal the gold in Fort Knox, but to irradiate it so it's useless to anybody else, so his own stock grows. What's brilliant about that is it adds just enough realism to move forward.
And what's great about that, because as we finished watching this, we talked about how this is arguably the first villain monologue in the James Bond. And it's not really, it's a dialogue, because Sean Connery points out the logistic impossibility.
Who said anything about stealing it?
And then Bond realizes you're going to irradiate it. You're going to just, and that realization, first of all, a brilliant way to do a villain monologue. Yeah, and it shows how cool your character is because, Bond figured that out. Isn't he smart?
Yeah,
he is.
So in a later Bond film, I'll pick one I'm less fond of. Same actor, the You Only Live Twice, right? When Bond is climbing up the volcano with an army of ninjas, you might go, wait, but these are both equally unrealistic. And then they're like, right, but within the genre conceits as I understand it, this is an aesthetic mashing that didn't work for me.
Yeah.
And this is the kind of thing, coming back to dreaming, right, where my mind now goes off on, okay, how would I have handled this? How would I have done this?
And someone did that for James Bond, because then they did the grimdark James Bond, and now Daniel Craig in his movies, where it is more realistic. It is more like, I don't think you have that question.
Well, I would argue it's
it's
no more realistic, but it again, I forget who once told me this, but it was like you're aiming for verisimilitude, not realism. Realism is unless you're doing an Ibsen play and very particular.
Unless you're Le Carré.
I mean, I don't know the intelligence world well enough to know that, right? It's what feels real rather than what is real.
Yeah.
But I think the interesting point you're bringing up as a dreamer, okay, I want to do this Bond. Hey, here's this other book I read.
Yes.
Here's this Bourne, or here's this
Bourne Identity. Right?
Yeah, Bourne Identity, or here's Clancy, or here's, and then you can even go outside the genre. Like, I want to make a detective. Who should I draw inspiration from? How about a character in Crime and Punishment?
Yes.
I'll make him Italian, and I'll do a reverse murder mystery. That's a jump, but that's how Columbo was created.
Yep. So you dream, you leave yourself open to possibilities. And there's something beautiful about that. Just like, I'm going to create this world, have these ideas. Lane is an idea machine, like constantly coming up with new ideas. But I think the next stage of the artist, the thing that is when you are truly stepping from dreamer and into artistic territory, is when you start to finish those things.
I think the big thing I wanted to point out was that dreaming sometimes feels like the most natural, and in some ways it is, but it is also a muscle that is worked by getting more source material.
Yeah. I know a lot of mid-career authors or people who have written their first and second novels who suddenly start stalling out, and they feel like they're creating the same thing. They're getting more writer's block than before. And often it's because they didn't give themselves time to continue dreaming. They got so caught up in, okay, I'm going to sit down every day. I'm going to spend this time writing. I'm going to do nothing but, focus on the craft, focus on creating these things, do my push, my releases, my book tours, that they forget to read, versus someone like Stephen King, who always feels like he's on the cutting edge of the trend, not because he's setting them, but because he's constantly reading. So he knows what we're, as a culture, interested in writing, talking about, thinking about,
Yep. And you see it, I think, especially in film, in this new era of genre mashing.
Yeah.
Which is just the most overt form of this, right? In some ways, it's the same thing as back when you used to watch a Star Trek episode and you're like, oh, yeah, they read 1984. They're doing their version of this episode.
Yeah. We were on the Sherlock Holmes episode, or literally the Wyatt Earp episode from the original
series.
Yeah, we're going to Star Trek is going to do a Western for a second.
But to get back to the point you were trying to transition us to.
Yes. Building that habit of, I'm taking myself seriously as an artist. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to start doing art as practice. Both of us had these defining moments in our lives where we sort of just sat down. And for me, it was finishing the first book. Going from somebody who had, I think, 34 documents in various states of notes or finishedness. One of them that was 365 pages. It was a huge amount of that. To being like, you know what? My friends wanted me to write this stupid fan fiction, so I'm going to write it and post it on Fiction Press, which kind of dates me. But it was the first one I'd ever finished. And suddenly I'm like, oh, that's different. I have this thing, it's completed. I can talk about this differently. I can actually share this with people, and it is a full, cohesive thing. And it kind of flipped something in my head of I need to finish everything. I moved from I spend my time dreaming and ideating and thinking about how perfect this thing can be, to making it imperfect but real, making it something that exists in the world that I can then work on and revise and share with people.
And it's not at least it feels like to me, it is not a solid line between dreaming and that, right?
Yeah.
Because especially the way you write, with outline and notes, right? But it really is, this is when you're hitting the craft portion.
Yeah.
You're starting to construct sentences. You're making decisions, which cut off other options, but also build up new ones. And in the realm of story, right, you're establishing your own taste, you're putting things down. So it really does become this great component where you are making a reality.
Yeah.
Because sometimes part of dreaming is sketching, right? And I mean that in the writing form, because that's all I can speak to. But the early phases of creating art is also that. So it's not like a hard line. It's this liminal transition between the two. But you have to start doing both.
Yeah, and I think that there's a switch that happens somewhere in there where you do go from someone who talks about writing to someone who sits down and writes. And maybe it's not you sit down every day for 2 hours and write. Maybe it's you sit down once a week for 6 hours and write, or you're writing on your commute into work for 30 minutes on your phone, or like the way that Lane does, talking into the phone, doing talk to text, to just create something finished. But it is that having the art, having it as a piece that is completed and finished and shareable, but not necessarily sharing it yet, just having it done. Did you ever have a moment where that kind of flipped for you?
So I came at it from a very different angle than you did, because I started.
Because I can tell you the story that I was thinking of,
Sure.
which is when you went to your dad. I think you and Dana went to your dad. You said, "Hey, we wrote this piece of music for you," and you made up something on the spot. And your dad said, "Great, play it again."
No, that I had already done stuff by that point. That was just me being lazy.
Okay.
Yeah, that was
okay.
Way to call me out.
I'm sorry.
No. I'm a terrible son.
We can cut that part.
That's really important. No, that's important for art. I think everybody should know this. I'm an all right artist and a terrible son and an even worse human being.
No, but it was one of those things that there's such a difference between coming up with the cool idea and saying the funny thing and actually writing a comic sketch and performing a comic sketch. Or, there's such a difference between we're riffing the idea and I can actually...
Yeah. So if we're talking about writing specifically, theater has a different thing than novels.
Yeah.
So my very first play I wrote in 3rd grade, and it was about... I was so impressed with myself. So Dracula was a dictator.
Oh,
and
that's actually a really cool premise.
It's a cool premise. And his chief enforcer is a human who's really evil. He's terrible. He's so evil, in fact, that when the full moon happens and he becomes a werewolf, the werewolf is a good guy who then fights Dracula. So this was my 3rd grade attempt at a play.
I love it.
It was a full-length 12 pages. Why I bring it up is the thing in theater is I put this half-made schlop up because performers needed the script.
Yeah.
So there is always the urge, if you're doing my thing and you want it up. And so when I first started doing stuff, because I wanted to show off and go to readings, you know what I mean?
When you first writing stories, writing plays?
Writing plays. Yeah. I started writing plays first. I wrote short stories and whatnot after I had gotten into that habit. But the reason why finishing was so important to me was because part of the thrill for me was handing it to people and hearing them say it out loud.
Yeah, because, theater is interesting in that way because your finished version isn't just a finished script. It's also like there's another part of it where it's just shared and people are reading it. So it isn't really finished until the whole ensemble comes in around it. So it's a slightly different beast, theater is.
No, it is. And I go back and forth between, I do think you can evaluate a script as literature on its own.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, not everybody does. Oh. But I fall more in the Albee camp on that one. But I also don't think that's a play. I think that's a script. I think a play is the performance.
It's the performance, yeah.
Because I came out, when I seriously started writing, not 3rd grade werewolf tales, it was after I'd been a director. It was after I'd been an actor. The idea of a deadline was so ingrained.
Yes.
And the thing that somebody had to take notes on and write and say out loud was so ingrained. That was already built in.
Yeah. So there's also something about accountability in the artist as a practitioner of art.
Yes.
When you're creating the thing, you have a kind of like, and I feel this about a book, I feel like I have a responsibility to finish it. Like, once I start it, I'm like, okay, I now owe this idea its completion. It's no longer just a bunch of notes. I've promised this thing that it will exist, that it will have some kind of life. And even if it isn't perfect, and nothing on paper is ever as perfect as it is in your own head, it changes somewhere along the way. It becomes I don't want to say a living, breathing thing, although I do feel like that sometimes. It
does feel like that. It
takes over its own thing. And it's like, oh, this has to go this way now. Even though the idea had this other element to it. This is, when it was perfect in my head, this existed, but it's imperfect on the page and it's pulling me this way. So I've got to go that way. That's something you can only discover by actually sitting down and putting the work into to finishing it.
So I'm a little different in that way. And I know lots of people.
Yeah, because yours don't exist until they're not, you don't know the ending. It does not.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. So for those who have listened to Lisa's and my previous kind of process things, I don't know the full story when I start. I start with a premise.
Yeah. You kind of uncover it as you go.
Yeah. So for me, it's only becoming more perfect. There will always be things that bother you.
Yeah.
But it's really exciting to me, not because this thing in my head is now morphing into something. It's there was a premise, there was an idea, there was a piece of costume, there was a line of dialogue, and now I'm learning where all that's coming from. And then it lives in of itself. It becomes a separate thing to the point where whatever originally inspired it doesn't need to be in it. In fact, most of the time it's not.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I can think of one play, literally, I think it's the only play I wrote, where the monologue which inspired it stayed in the play.
What play was that?
It was Prophet's Gamble.
Oh.
It was Merlin's remembering of almost being sacrificed.
Yeah, that's a good monologue.
Yep. That almost beat by beat stayed, word for word changed, but beat by beat stayed. But that does, and I'm going to use that as the transition for me, that does lead us to this other thing, which is I do view the art as something not entirely connected to me and certainly can grow beyond me.
Yeah. So we were struggling at some point in time when we were figuring this out over the definition of an artist versus the artist as someone who shares, someone who community builds, because we realized that we struggled with it because it was not the artist as a business, which is kind of how I first thought about it. Like, well, once you've created this thing, you've got to sell it, you've got to share it with people, you've got to get it out there. But we realized that there were just too many great artists who never took that leap.
That's right.
And it wouldn't be fair to basically say, oh, Emily Dickinson wasn't an artist because she never published anything. Like,
or oh my gosh, help me out. The woman who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird.
Oh, Harper Lee.
Harper Lee, because she only wrote one.
Yeah, she wrote the one, she shared it, and she's basically like, this was insane. I never want to do that again. Or someone like Poe, who did not successfully share it, and was, only became extremely popular after his unfortunate and early death. So, the artist exists in that state when they can create a finished piece of art. So it kind of goes from artist is just a dreamer on their own without the art in form, tangible form. And then you've got the artist existing with the art that they've created. And then you have the stage that comes after, which is the art without the artist.
Yeah. The art as it is perceived, as it is communicated, as it is dealt with. And the artist can have a large part of that, or it can have almost none.
Yeah. I mean, and obviously if you're a living artist and you want to make a living off of your art, you are the person who's out there bringing people to that. But it helps me to, think about promoting something or talking about it or selling it, to be thinking of it not as this is an extension of me, but as this is not me talking about myself. This is me talking about this piece of art.
That's right.
This is me marketing this book or this thing, or telling a friend I know, hey, I have a book I think you would like. I happen to have written it. But I think that's a way to just kind of get over that hurdle that you and I have of we don't like to talk about ourselves, which is so weird in a podcast where we're talking about ourselves.
Yeah, as we do our fourth one of these.
Yeah.
But notice, I'm just saying for the record, on like other podcasts, this is not all you get. And I do think that's good. And I know there are some folks who are like, no, the mechanism of the artist is inherently tied to the art, and that's cool if that's how you perceive it. But there's just too many cases where you don't know anything about the artist.
Yeah.
We only know bits and pieces about the artist. I'm thinking Homer. I'm thinking...
it's funny, everybody says we don't know anything about Shakespeare, but I feel like we know a lot about Shakespeare.
We know more about him than we do about most artists of his time.
Yeah.
But that still doesn't mean we know as much about him as, say, we do Arthur Miller.
Yeah, and certainly not as much as we know about writers of today. You've got writers who are on social media. You know what they had for breakfast.
Yep. Versus...
It's cottage cheese.
Yeah, you had cottage cheese. I had toast with an egg in the middle of it. So now you can move forward with your lives. I know everyone was waiting for that.
We still don't know what's for dinner, though.
Yeah. But compare that to Jane Austen, who we know quite a bit, but her sister burned a lot of her letters.
Yeah. So there's something incomplete there that we're missing.
Yep. So it was probably trash talk, and I really wish she hadn't burned it. I
wanted her tea. I wanted that Regency tea.
I want full Austinian wit unleashed on the morons in her town.
Moot point. We were talking about basically because we struggled with this element because it was artists as community builders, artists as business, and then it was like art on its own, because this encapsulates people who are creating for communities without the idea of profit. Like if you are creating for your church community, just so that, all of these people can go and enjoy, the music you have written in this particular service. So it just made me start thinking about art as a thing that exists to draw people to this message or to itself. Like you have a piece of art out there, and it calls to its audience, and they're all like, oh, that's something I like. Let me go and talk to the other people who like it. And as a living artist with your stuff, you can find those people, you can point them to your art. But it really is the art standing on its own at this point, having the effect it's having on the people who are, who it's for, who you originally created it to share it with.
Yeah, no. And I think this is, because I'm sure there's some deeper answer to what is an artist, but I think this one is really practical, and it also lets you sort of gauge where you are. Because you can be, I think one of the beautiful things about this definition is that if you have all three of them, you can say, yes, I'm an artist, but it doesn't tell you how good you are at it.
It does not.
Right?
Yeah.
You can, and that's the thing, so you can still practice. You can get better at dreaming. You can get better at craft. And you can get better at sharing your work with others.
Yep. And there are people out there who are really good at sharing stuff that are not that good at craft. But they're good enough that whatever they're doing is drawing people to them. So, even if, one of the reasons why I don't like to trash talk authors who I don't think their work is very quality, but they've got a big, audience. I'm like, the audience is seeing something I'm not. It's just a matter of taste. It's not a matter of artisticness. Like, that person is still an artist.
That person is still an artist. You may think it's good, you may think it's bad, and you may even have objective reasons why you think that outside of just your taste. But at the end of the day, if you are standing in front of a computer and you are dreaming, and you are coming up with different ideas, and then you are taking some of those ideas and you are creating a complete and shareable thing. And then you are giving that thing to others. You are an artist. You may not be a successful business person. You may not be
like Edgar Allan Poe.
You may not share it, and that happens after you die, like
Emily Dickinson.
Or you may be a superstar in all three.
I mean, and all of those are things you can teach yourself to do better. Yeah. Do you want to talk about AI?
I never want to talk about AI, but yeah, let's.
So the stance I have on AI is it's a tool, and it's a tool that is remarkably useful for that final state of artistry, the sharing with people. But I don't think it's useful at all for that first stage of artistry, the dreaming, the coming up with the idea, the generating the thing.
And I will say it is dangerous to the second one.
Yes. The reason that AI doesn't scare me is that it doesn't generate ideas. It doesn't come up with anything new. It can create more of the same stuff. It can feed the same formulas it's been given, but it doesn't have that ability to come up with something, a brand new story, a new and original take on something. It always chooses the lowest common denominator is the word I come up with, but it's more like it just takes the medium of the story, every average part of it, and the easy answer to what comes next, rather than the thing that people do, which is, well, this happens, but what if it was this instead? Oh my God, that's so much better. And then this other thing can happen.
That's right.
And you have a ratcheting of tension and a discovery of what's going, what's exciting, what's challenging, what makes this person struggle, rather than a kind of plugging into what, should happen next in the story. And I don't know that we can build a machine that will do that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. The generative part just doesn't frighten me. But let's call it there.
Mm-hmm.
I hope everybody enjoyed this, and everybody have a fantastic Friday.
Much more restrained than our last.
Well, we're not like running off of 2 hours sleep and on a 3-hour drive home.
3-hour drive home. No.
All right, folks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, that's another world saved, doomed, and or slightly weirder than we found it. Either way, you made it.
And when you're ready to plunge back into the abyss, we'll be here, lurking, whispering.
If you liked today's episode, tell a friend. If you hated today's episode, tell an enemy.
You can find us on Substack, YouTube, or wherever you scream into the void about podcasts. Drop us a comment. Send us your thoughts in all caps. We love that. You're charming.
And hey, if you want to help keep these stories weird and our tea hot, you can throw some coins our way on Substack. It keeps the lights on. Literally, Lane is writing in the dark.
Paperback Radio, no ads, professional narrators, and humanish weirdos telling you strange tales week after week. After week, after week, after week.
We told you to stay in the back room, Lizzie.
Ah.
Thanks for wandering through the chaos with Paperback Radio.
See you next time.